Welcome to today's program. This show focuses on book authors, and we're so privileged today to be speaking with a gentleman who's going to tell us a little bit about his book. Whether you know it or not, November is actually National Entrepreneurship Month, and it so happens that the gentleman who's going to be talking with us today, he has a new book. Check it out. Book's called Success and Self-Discovery, a business memoir with insightful tips and personal development advice that will help any entrepreneur. We have Stephen M. Stroum is our guest. Stephen.
Great to be with you.
Welcome.
I appreciate it, Kevin.
Welcome to the program. For folks who may or may not know you, let's tell us just a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Newton, Massachusetts. Went to Newton North High School and went to Northeastern for a short while, went into the Air Force. I came back out, went to became a disabled vet, ended up going back to Northeastern and took it away from there. I started my own business when I was very young, and it's been 46 years of incredible experience.
So is this your first book?
Yes, it's my first book. I decided, I made some notes in my diary in my journal back in 1983, believe it or not, that I wanted to write the book. And the working title at that time was Blue Collar Entrepreneur. And I worked with that title because fellas like myself that were brought up in a working class arena, a working class neighborhood, really didn't have all the contacts, and establishing and starting your own business was just a dream. And so that was the concept of blue collar entrepreneur, as opposed to a white collar entrepreneur, a kid that had the opportunity to go to Babson, MIT, top class school, raise money, start their business, and in the process take a salary and everything else. Short answer is the blue collar entrepreneur is like a prize fighter. There's no plan B. You got to go into the ring and you got to win the fight, and there was no second plan. It's just you have to make it happen, and that's the story, in short, of entrepreneurship. Again, on a working class type level, it's just you've got to make things happen.
What was the point in your life that you said, "I want to be an entrepreneur"? I don't know if I want to continue working for someone else and helping someone else's business advance. I want to be somebody who works for myself.
Well, as a kid, it's a dream, but I had the same dream of, playing for the Red Sox. I had an uncle that was very successful. He was a sales rep, manufacturer's rep, and he was in Seattle, and he would come to Boston. And I just remember as a young kid, probably about 6 years old, and I remember his name is Sam Stroum. Sam was in our kitchen, and he had his foot up on a step ladder, and I looked down, I saw those black alligator shoes, and he was beautifully groomed, very meticulous. And I said to myself, geez, that's the kind of guy I want to be. And that was a kid's dream. And then as you get older, you figure out how you're going to go about doing that. And it really comes along accidentally for quite a few people. I had a career, going in the corporate world, and, ran into some stumbles and bumps, and I ultimately decided the only way to make things happen for myself was to do it for myself. So I decided to start a business.
Not to go off the beaten path,
Yeah.
but why did you want to play for the Red Sox, and what position did you want to play?
Every kid's dream.
Sure.
I would have played a catcher. That was the position I played.
Fan of like a Carlton Fisk or something like that? Or
probably a chubbier version of Carlton Fisk at that time.
Okay.
Let's
talk a little bit about the business. You talk about being in business for 46 years at the Venmark Corporation. How did that get started?
Interestingly enough, it got started really in San Francisco. I had an experience. I was working with a company called Newsmaker. Let me back up a second. I worked for Fireman's Fund American Life Insurance Company, and I took over a sales territory that was 49th out of 50 from the company, brought it up to third place within 3 months, outproduced my predecessor's entire previous year, and I really felt great. I got called into my boss's office, sales manager's office, and I figured I'm going to get a raise. I'm going to, something good's going to happen. And he said to me, Steve, in life, some people need steak to be happy, and others are satisfied with pork and beans. He said, around here, pork and beans are just fine. Do you get my drift? And I got it. I had never felt so deflated in my life, and angry, and just such mixed feelings. How can you exceed the expectations of your company and end up being told to, hey, cool it? So I went back and basically chilled for 4 weeks. I made a few sales calls on the phone. I went to the Marina Green. I lived in San Francisco. I got a marvelous suntan, ran, had a great time, did exercises. 4 weeks later, I'm at the home office. The VP in charge of brokerage comes to me, puts his hand on my shoulder, and says, congratulations. I said, for what? He said, you're leading the company in sales. I said, I'm leading your company in sales. I haven't worked in 4 weeks. Shame on you. By this point, obviously, I didn't care if I got fired or not. He called me into his office, was a really nice guy, and he said, what's going on? And I told him. He said, well, what would you like to do? I said, I'd like to write the national sales training program for this company. You people obviously have no idea what you're doing. So he said, well, what if we don't? I said, well, I'll go to Safeco, the competitor. And long story short, they triple promoted me into the home office, and it became a disaster. Because in the field, in sales, you go out, you know more about your product than your customer does, and you're bringing something of value to them. And when in the home office, I was just another schnook. I'm just sitting there and, with a big office, wide open space. I didn't even have a private office, where in the field I had a company car, reputation, some status, and so forth, and a challenge. So long story short, I ended up giving a presentation in 1975. Interestingly enough, the Red Sox were in the World Series, and I remember walking up to the podium and seeing Johnny Bench catching. And so I gave the presentation on the new sales training program. It was a disaster. Absolute disaster. I almost got booed off the rostrum. I hadn't built alliances. I didn't understand the corporate setting. Frankly, didn't like it. So that night, ironically, we had a friend coming up to the city in San Francisco where we lived, and he had bumped into another fella. And long story short, they had a company called Newsmaker, and it was in marketing the most effective promotional technique for smaller companies, for any company, but especially for smaller companies, is publicity. You get news coverage on the media, news coverage in trade magazines, TV, radio, whatever it might be. And that news coverage is free, and somebody else is telling your story for you. It's a third-party story. So that was the company, Newsmaker, and my job was to create a package like the insurance industry, where I would teach salespeople how to sell publicity as opposed to teach them how to sell insurance. And so we had this package, and we had professional writers do the writing, and it took off pretty well. I did that. I had to make a decision. It was very difficult to go into that business because it was straight commission. I had never, I had a nice cushy job. I had a company car. I had, a nice salary. My wife, fortunately, had a good job at the time. We didn't have any kids. The decision was absolutely agonizing to put myself on the line and say, all right, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make this happen. So I ended up doing it. After a few months, my two people that I worked with, my partners, said, hey, we're going to put you on salary and give you a company car. And I was starting to make some very nice money. And then a few months later, it was July of '76, my wife and I came home for the bicentennial on vacation. And we had been in San Francisco for 2 years, almost 2 years. We promised ourselves we wouldn't go home for a couple of years. And that gives you an opportunity to get acclimated to a new area and so forth. Well, when I went back to San Francisco, I got a phone call from my partner at the time that said, hey, meet me at the airport. We're going down to LA. We've got some business to do. So I was excited to fly down to LA and go through this company, work with them. On the way back, he said, hey, listen, we would like you to start another company for us. I said, I don't have the energy. I was working, I was literally working from 6 in the morning until midnight. Didn't take time to eat. I was smoking a couple of packs of cigarettes a day. I lost a ton of weight. I was really cooked, burnt out. But I had been home on vacation for a week, and I could see things much more clearly. So I wasn't going to start another company for them. That wasn't our agreement. So I gave my 2 weeks notice and so forth. And I got a book entitled, Where Do I Go From Here With My Life? Because I was determined my next move, I was going to get it right. You know, I had left Boston, moved to San Francisco. I initially wanted to get out of the insurance business, but I stayed with it because that's what I did. And I got into this newsmaker business, and I loved the concept. So long story short, I went through this process with where do I go from here with my life. And then my wife and I got together and huddled and decided if I'm going to start a business, we'll do it back in Boston. So I started preparing for that by going to the library in San Francisco and prospecting, and I had the name picked out. Sales Development Associates was the name of the company. And we'd develop sales for clients by getting them publicity and enabled them to put on distributors, support distributors, and do that sort of thing. So when we decided to move back home, I still had a little trepidation about starting my own company. So I went and I had an interview, and I interviewed with a company called American Career Planning Services at the Prudential Center in Boston. Nice fellow by the name of Walt Cameron. And he liked me, but again, you don't have enough experience. I was only 28. I had only been in sales management for a few months, but I knew I could do it. So I said to him, listen, he said to me, you don't have the experience. I like you. I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. I said, listen, I think I'm going to start my own business. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I think I'm going to start my own business. And if I do, may I call on you? He said, yes. So I put $300 in the bank. I got a letterhead, logo, and business card made with Sales Development Associates, 125, had a little money left over. I hired a salesman full-time, went out and made the first sale. I had an appointment with him on December 10th, 1976, and it was at 1 o'clock. At 1:15, I had my wife call and make me appear as though I was busy. So my wife called, pulled me out of the meeting. At any rate, it was a great day. So Walt said to me, listen, I'm not General Electric. You know, I had been giving him my presentation. He said, I'm not General Electric. I said, what have you spent on advertising? He says, $40,000. I said, you can't afford not to spend another $400 and hire us. And he did. He wrote me a check for $395. Len, my salesman, and I went to the elevator. We were so excited. I hit the 38th floor. I had to go to the restroom. Fortunately, came out, and I looked at the wall, and there was Associated Industries of Massachusetts. There was a sign there that said, Directory of Manufacturers, $15.75. So I went in and bought a book. We went back and started cold calling. Then I took the check, deposited, and bought a typewriter. So here I was, a writer and a publicist who had never written one before because I had staff of writers. And I didn't even own a typewriter. And then I started the business. And believe it or not, in that first year, we did $160,000 in sales the first year. So it went crazy. By the end of the year, I had 10 full-time people, and it was quite an experience, quite a start. And
so where did the Venmark Corporation come from?
well, it's interesting question as after, in the beginning of 1977, we were looking for office space, and I wanted to incorporate. So I tried to incorporate as Sales Development Associates. And ironically, there was a company in North Dighton, Mass., right up the street, who was named Sales Development Associates, and they sold China, of all things. So I couldn't use that name, so I quickly had to think. I took the last 3 letters of my first name, Ven, my middle name, Mark, and created the Venmark Corporation, and that's how it started.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic story. It's how things get started. Now, I believe that you had started earlier on in that conversation talking about how you've been compiling information from the start of you starting the Venmark Corporation.
Correct.
What has that process been like, and when did you finally say, it's time for me to take all these notes that I have and cull them down into a guide that will help others who want to become entrepreneurs as well?
Well, what I saved, I always wanted to write a book. I did very well in college writing, and I always wanted to write a book. So I saved every appointment book and calendar I still have them, from 1976.
Goodness.
Okay. And I had journals that I kept as well, because I found especially with this exercise that I had done, where do I go from here with my life, it was basically sitting down for 6 weeks and writing essays, answering questions, and then the book helped you compile them into a big sheet of paper with what needs doing in your life, your top skill clusters, just a total understanding. So I began keeping a diary. And when I was starting off the business and with all the stresses associated with it, I was keeping very, very good notes and I would put time of day, I would put the date, time of day, and at least a couple of paragraphs of what I was feeling at the time, because there were so many things coming at you. So I wanted to write a book about entrepreneurship that wasn't, hey, look at me, how great I am, but more, this is really the kind of thing that you're going to run into. There are going to be betrayals. You're going to make dumb decisions, and I made some dumb decisions. But again, coming back to the baseball analogy, you can miss the ball 7 out of 10 times, and you're going to be an all-star. So there are things that you're going to run into. There are going to be bumps in the roads. There are going to be betrayals. There's going to be things that are just unimaginable that you just have to put your blinders on and overcome. So you have to have a tremendous amount of discipline and a great amount of resilience. And what helped me through most everything was the process. I had a process of writing. I had a process of selling. And that gave you security.
So my next question would be, where did you keep all of this, and what was the time that you said, okay, let's pull all of this stuff out, let's lay it out, and let's see what is the best antidotes that I could put into this book? I mean, do you have enough to write a couple more books, or do you feel that you took the best of everything that you've compiled over 40 years into this one book?
Yeah, I think I took the best of everything, but I probably, because this was a book that was actually transformative for me as well. I had never, when you're busy building a business and making moves, adapting. In my business, I had to adapt to the internet, adapt to different technologies. There were a lot of things that had to change, and that I had to study and stay with. So when you're in the game and you're in the arena and you're busy at it, you don't stop and think too much about the big picture. So I got to be 73 years old a couple of years ago, and I have a good friend who's written 3 books, and she's a friend of my wife's and I. In fact, the book is dedicated to my wife and her. Her name is Ellen. And I was talking to her about writing the book. She said, listen, just write a chapter at a time. She said, I'll review the chapters and give you feedback. I said, great. Well, I had a blog on my company website, and I had written probably 300 essays. And I had a good client tell to me one day, he says, why don't you compile those essays into a book? And So anyway, when I was 73, I finally looked at myself in the mirror and I said, Stroum, you've been talking about doing this for 40 years. It's about time you get off your butt and do it. So I started to do it, and I was writing and compiling some of the essays and, extracting information from different places that I had written previously. And I came up with 22 chapters, and I'm told it's very engaging, very readable. I've had clients I had one client tell me she read the book, she started reading it and cried. And because I pour my heart out in the book about family issues, when I became successful very young, at 28, all of a sudden earning 6 figures and really taking off. And this was back when 6 figures was a lot of money. The average income was $11,000 a year. So I'm doing very well, but rather than being elated, I became depressed. So I had to figure out why I became depressed. And I got involved with therapy, and I was actually in therapy at one point 3 days a week, because I had 12 employees that I was responsible for, 12 families, and I needed to keep myself together. And so I had to figure out why I became depressed, and it had to do with family stuff, as it usually does. And it was quite a story. So the story is, it's not, just, hey, look at me. It's, hey, these are things that you can run into, and you're going to learn things about yourself you never knew. So I made a tremendous effort to learn what I wanted for myself, because when I built the business, it was really more for my folks. It was more for my mother. There's a long story behind that. But, that sort of success didn't feel good because it really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I had the opportunity to study and study myself, transform the business. There's one chapter in the book that relates to changing tides. I went up to Gloucester for a long weekend, and I sat in front of a picture window. In those days, you could smoke cigars in your room. And I sat in front of a picture window overlooking Gloucester, and I had a cigar and a glass of wine, and I sat there and I watched this raging snowstorm come in. I mean, Kevin, it was raging. And then a couple of hours later, the sun shone, and the shoreline was absolutely beautiful. And it really was a metaphor for what I was experiencing, you know. And I wrote that weekend, I wrote a tremendous amount about my life and what I was doing, and decided to, downsize the business somewhat. I was caught up in sales management. I didn't really enjoy it, but I loved selling and servicing and I work with the same clients now for 46 years. I've kept a dozen clients that I've had all these years. So it was a very transformative experience for me. So when I wrote the book, finally, and then got it edited, I again changed the name from Blue Collar Entrepreneur to Success and Self-Discovery, because that's really what it was about, discovering what would make me happy. And I created the business that would make me happy. And ultimately, it became a one-man business. And I, at one point, looked to sell it. And the business broker, after analyzing everything, looked at me and said, "You have the best one-man business I've ever seen in my entire career. I wouldn't sell it if I were you." And I haven't. I'm still active with it and love it. And so that's how I got into it. So the book was really, I wrote it for myself.
Therapeutic.
It was therapeutic. And it gave me an opportunity to sit back and look at my career and say, "Geez, damn, man, you did a good job. You should be proud of yourself." And I'm very proud of myself. But again, over the years, you don't take the time. I wanted to make sure I get to every one of my son's high school baseball games. He was captain of the baseball team. I wanted to make sure that, my wife was cared for. We've been married 53 years now. I mean, there's just, all these other priorities. So I never had a chance to sit back and look at what I achieved. So this was a wonderfully transformative experience. And again, it's a book that can help people realize things that are getting in their way. One of the authors that I studied was Martha Friedman. She wrote a book called Overcoming the Fear of Success. And there's a lot been written about this. A lot of people are afraid of success, because with success comes tremendous responsibility. And in my family, I was on the bottom. So when I became successful, it toppled everything around a little bit. And created some problems that I had to iron out and figure out. And because people pigeonhole you a certain way, they identify you a certain way.
They do.
And you need to identify who you are and move ahead in that respect. So this book will help people do that. But not only that, with respect to entrepreneurship, I show people exactly how to write publicity releases, how to prepare them. I show them how to create a sales presentation. I was able to learn from a master. And there's really the nuggets there to execute. It's one thing to want to do it. It's another thing to make it happen.
So let me ask you, in the book you mention the importance of processes. What do you mean by that?
Okay, let me give you an example. I had always been, as a kid, a BC student. I had a label. My label was, Steve struggles, he works hard, and he gets B's and C's. I had two brothers who got A's, straight A's, without doing anything, without hardly working. And they were in Curriculum 1 in high school. So when I went to college, I went to Northeastern. First year I was in the Burlington campus. Second year I was in the Boston campus. And I had this fellow in class with me by the name of Dave Whitney. And Dave, slender guy, long hair in those days. This was 1968, 70, I forget exactly. Yeah, I graduated in 68. And David was a straight A student, but he didn't seem much smarter than me. So I said to him one day, we're sitting on the quad, we're sitting at the campus at Northeastern, people are flipping Frisbees around. I said, Dave, I got to tell you, you get straight A's and I get B's and C's. What's the deal? You don't seem that much smarter than me. And he said, Steve, I'll tell you the truth, I am much smarter than you, and here's why. And he showed me his study process. He had a process where he would get a syllabus from every professor every trimester, If they didn't have one, he insisted on one verbally, and he laid out his calendar for the entire 3 months, every hour of every day when he was going to be studying what his behavior was going to be. This was his process. So he showed me that process. I implemented the process, and guess what? I got straight A's my last 4 years of college. Straight A's because of that process. So when I got involved in business, and I got involved in business in California, I was fortunate enough to work for a fellow named Mike Gerber. Michael Gerber has written 13 different books, or more than that probably. He's one called The E-Myth, which is a great book. So you should buy 2 books, Success and Self-Discovery and The E-Myth. But Mike showed me the sales process for a sales presentation, introduction and so on and so forth. The difference between open-ended questions to gather information and closed-end questions to gather affirmation. So there's a whole process. So by knowing these processes, you can then excel. Another thing in a sales presentation, for example, a parallel that when I've taught classes on sales is you can be driving down the street in your automobile, and you can be driving in your car, and you can only see so much because you need to watch the road. You need to look at the road. But if you're on a train, you can observe everything because somebody else is doing the driving, and that's what a process is. A process is like a roadmap, and it takes you where you want to go. So by revering processes so much, I've been able to, when I've gotten nervous about certain things, when I started the business, it's nerve-wracking, I always relied on the process. And I knew that to make so many sales, I had to make so many sales calls. I had to see so many people. To see so many people, I had to make X number of appointments. To make so many appointments, I had to make so many phone calls. So the game became making so many phone calls Monday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning, Thursday afternoon, Friday morning. So that process was comfortable because I didn't have to think about making a living and making a whole bunch of sales. All I had to think about was making 20 phone calls an hour.
And by being organized, it sounds as though that was an ingredient to success.
Oh, without a doubt. You have to be organized. You have to be extremely well organized, and you have to be consistent. And you have to tell your clients that you love them. My wife, I tell my wife every day I love her, and she knows I do. We've been married 53 years. My clients know I love them, and I remind them of that all the time by sending them examples of my work and how it's helped them and talking to them about it. And they love it because they know I care. And that's why I've been able to keep clients for 46 years. So again, there's a lot of information in this book about how to succeed in your own small business. And there are 22 chapters. It's not all, it's an entertaining story. And again, it started off when I quit college the first time I went in the middle of the Vietnam War. And I was at a low point in my life, and I went to my father and I said, Dad, this is what I've done. I've quit college and I'm going to join the Air Force. And he looked at me and said, you're stupid just like your brothers, and you're a quitter. And Kevin, that's the last time anybody ever called me a quitter. And it turned out to be the most motivational thing my dad could have ever done. And I later in life told him that, and but in that particular moment, when I really could have used a hug because I made a stupid decision, he reinforced the fact that I really made a stupid decision, and I moved on from there. So there's some real stuff in there, and real family issues too. I had instead of when my business really took off, and instead of doing what was proper and what I knew because I had a degree in management, making a list of things to do, and making a list of components to a job description and what I needed, I went and I hired my brother because I figured, boy, this will be great. I can trust my brother and so forth. And that was a huge mistake because I should have been hiring a person to do a specific job and doing it practically as opposed to emotionally. And so that became a huge mess. And that's in the book as well. So again, there are so many topics. It's incredible. I have one chapter entitled "Low Pricing Can Kill Your Business." People say, low pricing? Geez, I always look to economize. Well, not necessarily. There's a concept in business called positioning. Where do you see, where are you? Are you a Mercedes or are you a Ford? And in my case, I was providing Mercedes services for a Ford price on my international publicity program. So what happened was I lost a sale one day, and I didn't really know why. I woke up in the middle of the night and I realized it was because my price was too low. It didn't feel right to my prospective client. They couldn't believe I could do what I said I was going to do for the low amount of money. So at that point, I changed the company name from Sales Development Associates to Venmark International, dramatically increased all my fees, and I couldn't keep up with the business.
It sounds like that old adage that you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
And if it's a cheap or inexpensive cost, then it might be devalued by
Exactly.
those who are seeking the service. Yeah. Interesting note, there's actually a point in your book where you actually call entrepreneurs the real American heroes. What do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, 99.9% of all companies are small businesses. So starting a small business and building a business is heroic, okay? Now, we all know the outliers. We know Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and Amazon. And these guys are heroes to me. Jeff Bezos has created 1.6 million jobs, and he's created a company that allowed me to self-publish a book. He created a company that allowed a lot of small business people to sell their wares very cost effectively. Bill Gates, this is a guy that started a foundation that's cleaned up malaria and polio, all kinds of wonderful things. I could go on and on. The fellow that helped finance Home Depot now set up New York NYU Medical School so people can go there and get a degree for nothing. So these are Ken Langone. These are wonderful things that entrepreneurs do. But on our level, back home, I drove down the street, for example, there was a Sullivan Tire. Sullivan just sold his entire company to his employees. That's incredible. I have friends who've sold their businesses and made a stipulation that those employees stay until they retire. So you take care of your people. I've given my employees money for rent. I mean, this is what small business people do. There's a great deal of loyalty. And small business are the American heroes. They employ most of the people in this country, create most of the jobs in this country, and they also do marvelous community work, support institutions, run bake sales, run contests, do all kinds of things for philanthropy. And that's the American spirit, the American dream. And it's free enterprise, it's freedom. That's what I love about, that's why I call entrepreneurs the American heroes.
So let's talk about the state of entrepreneurship in America. Where do you see it today?
Today it's a little encumbered by Joe Biden, frankly. There's been tremendous regulation in the last 3 excessive regulation. Excessive regulation creates barriers to entry into different fields. I had a client, for example, right up the street in Canton in the scale business. And when Obama started with his excessive regulations, when he was in office, I said to this fellow, I said, "Ray, are you concerned about competition?" He says, "No." I said, "Why?" Barrier, they can't afford it. The regulation, the cost of regulation, they have to hire attorneys, they have to do this, they have to do that, they have to have a special facility set up. They just can't come in to practice the same way. So I think, if you look back historically, when Reagan lowered taxes and lowered regulations, more businesses were created in the 80s. The 80s, it was an extraordinary economic ecosystem for business development. So today, a lot of people also want to get into business for themselves, smaller businesses in particular, because of the pandemic. They've learned that, working remote, that's pretty good. I can be independent. I don't have somebody looking over my shoulder. I can get my work done, and so forth. So it's almost a conundrum. There's more people that want to get into business for themselves, and in a lot of respects, it's a lot more difficult to do it. And I think, my opinion is government should stay out of it. For example, you look at government that wants to regulate Uber and Lyft. These folks are driving Ubers and doing Lyfts because they want to be in business for themselves. They don't want to be bothered. They don't want to be tied up in a union somewhere. They want freedom. So freedom is really what it's all about. And that's the most exciting thing about working for yourself and being self-employed, is to be free.
What can we as a culture do to encourage our, younger generation or generations to start their own business and not have fear of regulation and failure?
What can we can do what you're doing right now. On a high side with regard to President Obama, he started this National Entrepreneurship Month in 2011, and nobody's heard about it. I don't believe you heard about it until we were introduced. Mm-hmm. And so I think more people talking about entrepreneurship and starting your own business and being independent. And, it's the values of America. Values of America past, perhaps. Back in 1977, when I started studying this in earnest, small business created 92% of all new jobs in this country. Mm. Today, small business creates 64% of all new jobs in this country. So we need to get that back up again. And again, that happens with a reduction in regulation. In fact, there was just an article in Wall Street Journal where Biden had made a comment that, those corporate tax cuts worked because they ended up bringing in more revenue, creating more development. When a big company starts creating more things, they hire small businesses to help them out with it. And Raytheon has a tremendous number of subcontractors, for example. So the more fertile the environment for developing business, i.e. the lower the taxes and the more incentives for investment, the more business and entrepreneurship that's going to take place. And just think of it, when a big company puts in a factory here locally, all of a sudden you've got auto repair facilities close by, you need to have a coffee shop, restaurants, hairdressers, printing facilities, all of this whole ecosystem as a consequence of business development. So it's important.
It's obvious that you are passionate about entrepreneurship, November being National Entrepreneurship Month. Is enough done to celebrate this month and entrepreneurship? What could be done to further get the word out about entrepreneurship and getting involved in starting your own business?
If I had the answer to that, I personally have sent out press releases to various media outlets, and I've created a little publicity about it, but there's just not a lot of talk about it. And I think the chambers of commerce should make more noise about it. But again, I don't have the answer other than being out and chatting with you and exposing it to the folks out there and getting people to stop and think, wait a second, being in business for yourself and being independent, and if you're fortunate enough to become financially independent, it's great. I've got a client friend of mine. He was a client since '77. He's sold 2 businesses for millions of dollars. He's 79 years old. He said, Steve, we have lunch every month. He said, Steve, I still get up every day trying to figure out how to make some money. 79 years old, multi-millionaire. I still get up every day trying to figure out how I can make some money. So this is, it's a behavior. To me, it's a wonderful way to be. I get up every day trying to figure out how to sell books.
But is there a surefire way to instill ambition or common sense in individuals, or is it something you possess?
You need to be inspired, and I think you can be inspired by reading a book. I've been inspired by reading books. I was inspired by my uncle, and when I saw that handsome man with black alligator shoes on, and when I met with him in California, wonderful, wonderful guy, took me to lunch, and we were walking along, and he went into a clothing store and he bought a necktie. This was 1975. He bought a necktie for $45. That's like $250 today. That's insane. But he had the freedom to do that because he loved neckties. He had the most colorful neckties in the world. But so you're inspired in some way, shape, or form. David Whitney inspired me back at Northeastern. I wanted to become a better student. So it's not something, you got to have a fire in your belly. And where you get that comes from all kinds of different inputs. And if somebody wants to be in the business for themselves, they got to start thinking that way. The first advice I give them is think of what you like to do. If I were going to start today, I'm a fisherman. I love bass fishing. So I would go to Google. I would find out every company that manufactures fishing equipment, from lures to fishing rods to fishing, to you name it, because I would want to spend my time talking to people about what I love, fishing. Okay? So, not only retail, you have naturally have Bass Pro Shops, but you have all these other companies associated with it. Well, if you're hiking, it's the same thing. It could be shoes. It could be, who the hell knows? My point is, put yourself in a position to set yourself up to win. And that's not, people who sit in companies, big companies all day, and they have their cubicle. And I have somebody that told me, geez, I only have 10 more years to put up with this. And I'm saying, you have 10 more years to put up with it. What are you putting up with? Go make yourself happy. Figure it out. Work at it. Years ago, when I first became, quote, successful, because success early on was defined as making a lot of money, I redefined it as peace of mind and making a little money. I had an old friend come to me and say, how did you do this? I said, I worked real hard. I said, think of when you were in college and you wrote a paper. Somebody would spend 30 hours writing a paper. How many people spend 30 hours sitting down to plan a business for themselves? So it's the environment that you're in. So if you want to be in business and you want to be involved in a small business, associate yourself with those people. If you can't meet them personally, meet them through books and read books. And I have a list, by the way, of about 22 different books that I put in the back of mine that are of interest to anybody that really wants to be in business for themselves and grow. So I hope my book will inspire people to do that, because I think entrepreneurship is the key to a happy life.
We've talked about how you compiled and put it together and you wrote the chapters. I think probably one of the final stones we haven't overturned is deciding whether to go seek a publisher, self-publish, and what it was like to take your first batch of books and be like, wow, I finally did it.
Well, what I learned is, writing the book is one thing.
Yeah.
Getting it published is something different altogether. So I got in touch with a fellow by the name of David Meerman Scott. He wrote a book on marketing and PR, and he's written 13 different business bestsellers. Ironically, I sent him my book, and he's endorsed it, and it's on the back cover. But I went to him, and he introduced me to a woman editor, and she was just extraordinary, and really took my raw data, my 22 chapters that I wrote, and edited them down, told me where I needed to change some paragraphs, some sentences, some titles of chapters, and do different things. And she helped mold it into the book that it is today. And then when I put it online and got the first sale and so forth, I decided to self-publish because she advised me to do that. 80% of books today are sold on Amazon. So that's where they're sold, and it's a great process. I was very proud. It's available in a soft cover like this, and it's available in a Kindle edition. So on November 9th, I put it out on Kindle free, and I was blown away by the fact that I had 835 orders.
Wow!
Not only that, but I came in first place in Amazon for business biographies. And I came in first place in Amazon for business books itself.
So are you in a roundabout way trying to say that this is a bestseller in its category?
It has the potential. Okay. But on that particular day, on November 9th, it was. It was the best in two categories. It was the best business biography, and it was the best small business book.
Okay.
So
what now? You've success in self-discovery. Is it a matter of just promoting it and getting folks to purchase it, or is there a bigger endeavor that follows this?
No, well, right now it's promoting it and having fun with the process. have my 75th birthday coming up Monday, so I want to spend my days having fun. So that's what this process is. So right now, that's really what it's all about. I have other ideas for books, and I'm making notes constantly. One concept is the impersonalization of America. Unfortunately, and I started writing about this back in the 70s. With the advent of the internet, there's a lot of impersonal stuff that takes place, and there's not enough one-on-one conversation. I think people have found that with the remote work versus coming back to the office. You're back in the office, you're with your comrades, you're with your team, and so forth. So that might be another area to look at. But this was such a big deal for me personally that right now I'm just thinking about how to get it in more people's hands and have some fun in the process.
Could this be something that you become the next Tony Robbins type person who gets up and maybe you can kind of give a talk on this book? They want the in-depth version. You read the book. If you want to kind of hear it from the author himself to kind of give you some one-on-one, 101 type stuff, go to a certain venue to kind of take him in.
I'm not a Tony Robbins type.
Okay.
I've watched him over the years, and he's built a nice career. Tremendous amount of promotion to do that. I have no interest in doing that.
Okay.
Will I go speak to students at school? Absolutely. I've spoken to students at Babson. I spoke to students at BC, at Northeastern. Delighted to do that. Delighted to speak to students. Delighted to speak to students in a high school environment. That's fun stuff that can really impact somebody. Somebody can leave a classroom in that day and say, geez, I want to be like him. So, wow. This weekend, I did another TV program for a fellow in New York who used to be in the pharma industry for 30 years in the pharmaceutical business, Greg Cellini, Brother Greg. He saw a news release that I put out. He saw my own publicity, and he said, would you send me a book, please? I did. And he invited me on his program, radio program, Thank God for Mondays. And the interesting thing about Greg was in the pharma industry for 30 years. He wanted to do something that was more meaningful, so he became a Franciscan brother. Contacted me through this process, and we had a terrific interview on TV. And the reason he wanted it is because he's trying to help children. He's trying to help kids transform themselves from reform schools, from a disadvantaged background. And he wants to inspire them, and he wants to help them. And that was why he chose to put me on TV with them and so forth. That feels great. So again, as I said, I'm not getting any younger, so this is how I want to spend my time. So if I can, end up in a high school or a college talking to a few kids, great. But I don't want to go out and be a Tony Robbins. I don't want to make a business out of it.
As someone who has published a book successfully, if you were to give some advice to someone who is, probably thinking about writing a book, or maybe they were you, 40-something years ago, starting to compile, what advice would you give to anybody who wants to, take information they feel that would be useful, or even maybe they're great at storytelling? How would you tell them to go about doing what you did, or at least writing a book? What advice would you give?
I would give them the advice that I got from my friend Ellen. Write one chapter at a time. Just sit down and write one chapter at a time. I didn't have a real outline. This was just an evolution. I ended up writing one chapter at a time, and I ended up with 22 chapters. And then I found a great editor, and she got rid of about 15,000 words. So it's a 300-page book, but it used to be, considerably longer. So it's just do it. Just start off. Make notes. Buy a notebook. I have my same friend I told you about that wakes up every day figuring out how to make money. He used to say to me, and he taught me this, and I've been fortunate enough I've worked with small business owners for the last 46 years. These are bright people, and they're exciting people to be with. And what he told me that when he was going to start a new project, he would open up a file folder, put the tag on the top of the file folder, open it up, and put one piece of paper with what his goal or his note was, close it up, put it in his drawer. And he'd go on through the day. If he found something that was relevant, he'd throw it in that folder. And after a couple of months, the folder got pretty thick, and he was able to look at it and refine his ideas. So it's just do something. Just start off doing something. And I didn't sit there idly for 40 years. I mean, I made notes. I wrote over 300 essays. So, but I finally had the opportunity a couple of years ago to just get to it. And I confronted myself about it because I had been afraid to do it. There's always when you're a blue collar kid growing up, there's always a fear, I might not be good enough to do that. And lo and behold, it's all how you look at it, And like you said, I was very proud last week to be #1 in 2 categories on Amazon. This blue collar kid that made it happen. So you just got to make it happen.
Anything that I haven't asked you during our conversation, but you feel is going to benefit the folks who are tuning into this program?
Just not really. No, you've been terrific, and I've enjoyed it. I think just do it. I don't want to steal that from Nike, but use Google, use artificial, use whatever you need to. You chat GBT, Google. But if you have an interest in something and you have an interest in writing a book in a particular area, start reading more about that. And just ask yourself, at the end of a week, what did I do last week to help me achieve my goal? And if you can't answer it positively, you're BSing yourself. So you've got to write it down and commit to it for yourself, not for anybody else. And that's the main thing. Like I said, I built my business initially for my folks. It didn't feel, it felt good on one level, but viscerally, it didn't feel good. I had to do it for myself. I had to transform the business to the way I wanted it. And so I think that's the best way to live. And I feel from this whole experience very fortunate to be in the position I'm in. And if I'm able to, create some sparks that create a fire for somebody, terrific. I'd love to hear about it. They can go to smstroum.com, www.smstroum.com, and tell me about it. I'd love to hear it. So,
well, I want to thank you for being my guest.
It's a pleasure being your guest.
Until our next program, have yourself a great day.